Well, back here, government MPs opposed to the live export trade, are renewing their calls for action following last night's expose on the ABC's Four Corners program. Kelvin Thomson wants the Gillard government to ban live exports altogether because animal welfare standards can't be guaranteed overseas. Now, he's speaking to our political reporter, Latika Burke, in Canberra.
Kelvin Thomson, welcome to ABC News 24. Were you surprised by Four Corners program last night, given it's just over a year since the last program exposing cruelty in Indonesian abattoirs?
Surprised and disgusted, Latika. I think that all Australians viewing Four Corners last night would have been outraged at the scenes of sheep being buried alive. It's completely unacceptable.
Now, Wellard's the company that's exporting these sheep, firstly to Bahrain and then to Pakistan, says that it did everything in its control to try and ensure that these sheep were processed humanely. Do you accept that explanation from them?
Well, there has to be some accountability, there has to be some responsibility here. We should no longer export live animals to either Bahrain or Pakistan. It is clear that their standards of animal welfare are very different from our own. To have a senior Pakistani bureaucrat telling us that their method of slaughtering animals is more humane when we saw sheep being buried without even being killed first, it was just pathetic, and I think that the Pakistani claims of foot and mouth disease and anthrax to justify this outrage were just ridiculous. The fact is we should not export animals to countries like Bahrain and Pakistan which can act in such a capricious, unfounded and inhumane way.
Now, Wellard says they were forcibly removed from the site as they were trying to ensure these sheep were humanely slaughtered. What does that say about the efficacy of the government's export chain supply assurance system that they set up in the wake of the last Four Corners program?
Well, I think that the system at the moment is functioning like an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff when what we need is some fencing at the top. And for my own part, I think that Wellard's export licence should be suspended. I know they say that it was Pakistan's fault, but the fact is that companies have to have a plan B in place if the shipment is rejected by Bahrain, as it was in this case, and their plan B was a disaster. The fact is they made the decision to send the sheep to Pakistan, and they did not tell Pakistan that the sheep had been rejected by Bahrain. There has to be some accountability here. Someone has to accept responsibility here. It's not good enough simply to say it's not my fault.
What about the government? Isn't this a disaster for their new export supply chain system that they assured us would work in the wake of what happened in Indonesia?
Well, as I said before, I think the system is amounting to an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when what we need is some fencing at the top. And the kind of fencing that I believe would help is to ban live exports to countries like Bahrain and Pakistan, where people have very different animal welfare standards from our own, and also to take action against exporters where the supply chain assurances do not work, and they have not worked in this case. The Minister says that the regulator has the power to suspend export licences. Well, let's see it. So far there has not been any action against exporters, even on occasions where numerous breaches of the system have been detected.
Do you have any plan or intention to renew your call for a ban on live exports with the Prime Minister directly, either in caucus or in person?
Well, the government has in place a live export working party, and I'm a member of that working party and have been using that vehicle to raise these concerns. I have referred to the issue of the treatment of sheep in Kuwait and Bahrain before, and I will continue to do that based on some of the revelations in Four Corners last night. The fact is that this is not an isolated incident. We've had cattle in Indonesia, we've had breeder cattle in Turkey, we've had sheep in Egypt, we've had the Cormo Express. Now we've got sheep again in Bahrain and Pakistan. So this is not an isolated incident. With apologies to Bob Dylan, how many isolated incidents will it take before we know that this has to stop?
Well, that's certainly the argument from the industry and the Agriculture Minister, Joe Ludwig. They're all saying that this is unprecedented and a one-off. So you don't believe it is?
I don't accept that it's a one-off, Latika, and I think the history is very clear in relation to that. We've had the outrages in Indonesia last year in terms of the way that cattle were treated. We've had the treatment of breeder cattle in Turkey. You'll remember the Cormo Express. We had John Howard suspended the live sheep trade to Egypt after revelations of animal cruelty there. Unfortunately, we've seen a litany of animal cruelty incidents which suggest that we need to take stronger action and put better protections in place. And in this case, I think we should be suspending the trade to Bahrain and to Pakistan of live animals, noting that their standards and ours are very different.
And just very quickly, Kelvin Thomson, do you believe that the ending of the live trade export is inevitable as we see more and more instances broadcast on our television screens?
Look, I do think it's likely, Latika. I think that there are many farmers and many companies who would be very troubled by the footage on Four Corners last night. I'm aware that some companies have been moving to establish domestic processing facilities, and I would like to see that happen. I think that we should transition away from live export towards domestic processing, and that there are jobs and economic prosperity as well as animal welfare reasons for doing that.
Kelvin Thomson, thank you for joining us on ABC News 24.
Good to talk with you.